The jobs aren't going away because of AI. The jobs are going away because of leadership decisions that are prioritizing AI and profit and cost savings over human job. We're just talking about profit. We're just talking about corporate direction. But there are human impacts, and those human impacts go beyond politics.
Neill, founder and CEO of Keynote Insights. Your book, What Matters Next, a leader's guide to making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving too fast.
It's the economy shifting in all these different ways toward enormous amount of centralization into fewer and fewer companies. It's also the disruption of labor. What does it mean for individuals to be resilient and nimble and adaptable in those contexts? That's a big discussion.
Hello, everyone. My team and I have been crafting content and stories that inform, inspire, empower, and bring real value to you. If you haven't already, please take a moment to check that you're subscribed. It's the easiest way to support our work and stay updated with every new release. Join us on this journey of learning and discovery. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for our latest drops.
Hello, and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast show. Once again, powered by citiesabc.com, intelligenthq.com, and businessabc.net. Once again, we are here profiling global leaders and personalities that are making the bridge between business, technology, and society. And I think in the last, we got right now close to 400 people we've been interviewing on this podcast. And one of the things I always try to do is bring people that inspire me or that make me rethink things. And we are in a very special moment when we need to shape the world. And as well, I would say it's unique in history, probably in the last, depends on the way you calculate history, there's 100,000 years of history of humanity as a civilization, and probably only 30,000 years of really proper civilization, 10,000 of sustainable, at least, memory. And one of the things I like to highlight, especially for the case of this interview today, is are we going to be shaping this leadership in a time where we got to have a new species that actually we invented? Whatever you like it or not, there's an alien species or AI species. So for that, I'm very excited to bring to our series Kate O'Neill, that is a Tech Humanist personality, a global shaper and visionary thought leader and leader that has been leading a lot of the things and discussion, both as an author, as a speaker, and as a thought leader, and as well as a Fortune 500 advisor, so advising the top companies in the world. So Kate is the founder and CEO of Keynote Insights, and strategic advisor firm that helps organizations navigate digital transformation while keeping human experience at the center. And part of that work, she's been delivering a lot of work with the Fortune 100 companies, tech giant, and global institutions. As well, in terms of her massive achievements, she was one of the first 100 employees at Netflix, pioneering the company's first content management role. She also developed Toshiba, America's first intranet, and founded the Meta Marketeer, a digital strategy agency focused on customer experience. So in terms of our work as a keynote speaker, there's a lot of work, like 17 years for Google, IBM, Adobe, Microsoft, and Cisco, and as well doing a lot of programs and workshops with the likes of Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Charles Schwab. And in terms of Google series, she actually spoke as well. That's the Engineering Day, just to mention a couple of them. She has lectured at Harvard, Cambridge, and Yale. And the list is quite impressive, including earned comparisons to the management guru, Peter Drucker. So the list goes on. I want to highlight as well her achievement, especially as an author, that I think I'm going to be touching in this interview. As a respected author, Kate has written several influential books, including Tech Humanist, 2018, as well Pixels and Plays, What Matters Next. That is the last book from 2025 that are going to be touching as well here. And their work has been featured in a lot of publications such as Wired and USA Today. Of course, the list goes on. There's a lot of other things, but today I will go to this. Of course, we'll put the bio and the wiki on businessabc.net so you can actually a proper wiki of ours with all the information. So, Kate, it is a pleasure to have you here and an honor.
Well, thank you, Dinis. What an incredible moment to listen to you read through all of that. It's and I'm afraid that's all we have time for. It's like the bio itself, right?
No, it's amazing your work and as well your passion for doing things. And what I love is that you've been between three areas which are very dear to me as well. Between working with big corporations, trying to make a difference, then reflecting and researching. And then third, and as well, writing, of course, and publishing. And then third one is coaching and as well going, which is not an easy task, especially with everything that is going on nowadays, especially the velocity and a lot of different things. So I want to start with a question that I normally go, but probably in your case, I will be reverse engineering. So as someone that has been doing so much, and I think you are a doer in a lot of ways and a fantastic thriving mind. What was the person that influenced her? Probably if you go back to your early age, and this is always something I like to start, a person or, I don't know, a school or family or member or mentor that probably influenced you more when you started all of this and had a mark in your career?
Oh, that's a fun and a great question. I think there have been a number of them, as I'm sure many of the folks you've spoken with would say. But there's sort of the stages of life, the moment when someone gives you the right kind of encouragement, right? I can remember in fourth grade that I was scoring really well on math tests and doing better than everyone in my class. And my high school, my then teacher, Mr. Kakovas, I don't think he's still with us, but if he is, I hope he encounters this. And Mr. Kakovas, shout out to you, sir, because he said, he thought to himself, like, this student needs guidance and needs, some challenge. And so he took me, but he made sure not to single me out. He chose two other classmates he thought were smart with math and could do advanced work, and pulled the three of us aside and gave us additional math challenges to push us ahead. So in fourth grade, we were doing algebra and, light calculus, like pre-calculus, and some really, really advanced stuff. And I think that was, to me, a really great example of, there's no reason that you can't challenge yourself to do more. That's one lesson I think that sort of comes from that. There's no reason why you can't be the person who helps someone develop more skill and kind of take that person to another level. And there's also no limit to the amount of knowledge that's out there, and that if we're curious and motivated, that we can continue to surround ourselves in it. So, of course, there are people throughout my career, but I think when I think back to Mr. Kakovas, pulling me aside and giving us those additional math lessons, I think it really sets the tone for my curiosity and my drive and, my interest in finding all of the knowledge I can possibly find and trying to make sense of it. And it seems, and it's like that might be something that's true of you too.
No, it's a beautiful story and very inspiring. And I think we all had people, but having one specific makes a big difference, especially in early days, because it can actually shift an entire life. And sometimes we take that for granted. And I'm always grateful for these people that made who we are. I have as well one of them in my background.
Yeah.
So, Kate, so another question from your foundation. So as a writer, and you wrote a lot of things. I mentioned just a couple of books, but the list goes on. We would probably have a podcast just to talk about your books. So there's a lot of things. So from The Future Starts Now, that is insights into the future of business and technology and society, to just for people listening, connectedness, how the best leaders create authentic human connection in this connected world, surviving death, what loss taught me about love, joy, and meaning, which is much more personal. Mm-hmm. So you've been writing since 2000, I would say actually for a long time, actually for probably.
Sure.
So before I go to all the books, and I'll touch some of them, and some of them are more personal, but in general, they are related with technology. So tell us especially about how do you start writing and how that process affects your work as a business and technologist.
Well, it's funny, there's another childhood story, which is, it sounds apocryphal. It sounds like I'm making it up, but it's actually true. In first grade, I won a statewide competition for a young programmers competition and in the state of Illinois in the US. And then I also that same year won first place in a young authors competition for writing a book called Herman the Horse Gets Lost. And so the program that I programmed for the Young Programmers competition, by the way, was called Doggy. So there was an animal theme across both of these works. But I think what that demonstrates is that there is this lifelong fascination with both technology and with writing and the written word and with communicating. And so I think that's just there. It's just true my whole life that that I've always wanted to express through the written word, you know, kind of find ways to say something original and meaningful that sort of creates new thought. I think you said this in your intro, the idea of moving people to new ways of thinking about things. I think that's one of the most profound experiences that I know, is when someone comes back to me and says, I'm thinking about this in a totally different way because of what you wrote or what you said. And that's, I mean, imagine like if someone told you you could build a technology that would change the way people think about something, you'd be like, that sounds powerful. Like, should we do that? Could we do that? But you can already. And it is with just communication, with the written word, with the spoken word. I think that is the most fascinating thing about human to human dynamics to me, and always has been. So throughout the whole narrative of my work, my career, it is this recurring theme of language is this incredibly powerful technology that allows us to connect with one another, allows us to reshape each other's thinking if we're good with it, and allows us to form bonds and create lasting impressions for that go on into potentially into eternity, or as long as that written word lasts. So I think that's incredibly fascinating. And for me, that theme of language as the original human technology is the one that keeps recurring throughout my work.
Yeah, and language is at the moment probably the first stage of this new alien intelligence. So it has much more impact to what we write and how we take it forward. Although sometimes language and intelligence or our own thought leadership is slightly different. So coming back to your background, and I always like to go through the background in terms of these experiences. So from writing and from taking this, you have experience that starts as a corporate, and you have been, of course, being as well known as a tech humanist. So there's a lot of things that brought these 25 years of experience in technology, strategy, and innovation. So a bit of background, how do you start your career? We look at people that influence now how you start your career, because of course there's so much highlights in terms of both your academic part, and then as a technical writer, and then of course there's Netflix, which is quite an important and significant leap, especially being one of the first ones. So just a bit of that background before we go to the books and your present.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things I often tell students when I talk to them about, you know, what direction they're taking in their own careers, or how they're facing their studies in order to shape the careers they intend to have, is that I think it's incredibly important to lead with curiosity. And I had curiosity about a lot of things: language, theater, you know, kind of performance, music as well. Again, a kind of communication, a kind of performance, but also technology and math and a lot of other fields. And so it was really hard for me to choose what topic I was going to major in college. And I did choose language because I imagined myself as an interpreter at the UN. That's like the vision I had of myself, is like, I'm going to I could always be an actor. I could always be a musical performer. Like all of those things could happen, and I don't necessarily need a college degree to do those things. So I'm not going to get a college degree in those things. I'm going to focus on the thing that if I want to do it, I need a college degree, and all those other things are still options to me. So I think keeping your options open is a really important aspect of this. But I chose language, and I majored in German, minored in Russian and linguistics with a concentration in international studies. And through that, it was a really great sort of foundational education for me in thinking about the components of language and really understanding language as a system. So, sort of forming this, the backbone of what we were just talking about, this idea of language as the first human technology. At the same time, though, it gave me the opportunity to, I became the supervisor at the language laboratory at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And it was at a time when the visual web, the World Wide Web, first came about. And it had the very first graphical web browser, Mosaic, came about. And I saw it, and I got those like tingles on the back of my neck. You know that feeling where you're like, what? This is crazy. I thought, this is going to change everything. And so the fact that I had the opportunity as the supervisor of that language laboratory to build a website for the language lab was a chance to sort of get my hands dirty in, working with the web and building a website. It turned out to have been the first departmental website at the university. And it was early enough. I don't know if Dinis, if you remember this time frame, like around 93, 94, where people were making like handwritten lists of what websites were new every day because it was that few. Like, I think that's just mind-blowing to young people today, the idea that there could have been a time when there were only, a few dozen websites coming online on a given day. But my University of Illinois Chicago Language Laboratory website was one of them, and it attracted the attention of a guy who was at Toshiba. And he reached out to me because I had the webmaster at UIUC, whatever, email address in the footer of the website. We started a communication, and he recruited me to Toshiba to come do technical writing for them and build an intranet for them. And it turned out to have been the first intranet at Toshiba. And so this pattern, I think, is a really important one because we're in another time frame where there's an opportunity to be pioneering. But I think you have to have a very clear understanding of what you're curious about and what drives you, and hold it loosely, because you also have to be opportunistic about the things that emerge and the opportunities that present themselves, and being able to say, you know what, I didn't see that coming, but I can see how I could apply this curiosity and this skill set to that problem and go figure out something that no one has figured out yet, and then move on to the next problem and the next problem. And that opportunity exists today. And I really hope that young people who are listening, or the parents of young people, will be able to spread that message. 'Cause I think we really need people to bring their best minds, their best curiosity, and their best problem solving to the issues that we face.
No, completely. And this is a very beautiful story as well, and explains, I'm thinking really how much we went since then. And the velocity as well, because it's a different world from that time that I was as well. I was still in university at the same time. And I remember as well the first experience and writing. Actually, I wrote a small book about language and poetry, and actually I studied the same like you, so it takes me to a roller coaster of emotions and memories. No, it's fantastic.
We have so much in common. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, and as well, of course, the linguistics and language actually are much more important now to understand the internet and as well the AI systems. So from that experience with Toshiba, which is quite impressive, because building the first internet and the influence that I'm sure that happened in a company like Japan, a Japanese company that normally is a bit slow and although very innovative, but at the same time very traditional. You went to Netflix, and of course, Netflix being one of the first 100 employees is quite an impressive, especially bear in mind how Netflix changed the entire way we consume entertainment, entertainment, and everything else. And as well, right now, it's interesting for people listening to us that Netflix is worth more than all the Hollywood studios together. So
Yes.
it's an interesting thing as well to remind the power of this. So a bit of that background, and I think it's a quite fantastic experience.
Yeah, thank you. I loved the Netflix moment of that journey was a really, really fun part of it. I did go from Toshiba. I actually left to go to a startup that wasn't Netflix, and I had a series of startups, and it's Silicon Valley in the 90s. You know, there were a lot of startups just then as now, and so I sort of developed a rapidly growing skill set during that time, which again, I think that's a really important lesson for younger people earlier in their career to take away, is that era, that stage of your life when you can just sort of be a sponge and take on new challenges and new assignments and just accrue like new skills and be a generalist, you know, someone who is able to come at problems that no one has seen before with like a Swiss Army knife of tools, because you have seen so many different kinds of things and you're able to synthesize the problem solving. So what happened then was that after a series of startups, I bought a DVD player, and the DVD player had an insert in it for this new startup called Netflix, and they were renting DVDs by mail. And when I started using the service, within a couple of weeks of using it, I think they sent me an email that said, hey, would you like to be part of a beta program? We're testing out a model where you could just be in a subscription plan, and we would send you DVDs out of your subscription plan. So they had invented the queue, which was obviously, you know, sort of the stage after one by one rentals and before they figured out streaming. And I said, yeah, I'd love to try that. And as soon as I used it, I said, they have really figured something special out here. Like, this is going to be it was one of those moments again, like this is going to change everything, the tingles on the back of the neck. And so I actually sent my resume to them and I said, look, I don't know what you need or what you have, but here's what I can do. Here's some of the skills I have. I'd love to just come help you figure out, you know, what take on some of the problems that you're facing. So they created a role for me, and it was the content manager role. It was the first content manager role. And I had a team of content producers. So we managed the movie database, you know, so the structured data, structured content about all the movies. And the story I love to tell about that is the very first thing I noticed when I came in and looked at the content database is that they only had one genre per movie, which, as any movie lover knows, like, that is not going to work. You need, like, where does rom-coms happen? You have to be able to have romance and comedy be two genres, right? Or Ocean's 11, or any of these movies that have like 10 genres associated with them. So I got the permission to redo this whole entity relationship, you know, break down the database structures and realign them. We recoded all of the movies in the database. It took the better part of a year, and almost everybody in the company, you know, the database team, the product team, the engineering team, like, everybody was involved. Of course, as I'm saying, I was one of the first 100 employees, so it's only 100 people I'm saying when I'm talking about that. But still, it was a really, really big undertaking, and it was ugly. But it meant that now, in the 20 years since then, they have used a lot of machine learning to better understand the patterns and relationships between movies and to be able to surface these AI-generated categories like, you know, Oscar-winning 20th century period pieces, which you would never have been able to do without first having fixed the limitation of only being able to have one genre per movie. And so I share that example often with leaders because I think it's a classic example of the kind of what we really mean when we talk about digital transformation, that transformation is this act of catching up and like resolving your technical debt so that you can be fully present in the moment that you're in and then look ahead towards innovation and say, what could we do now? Right? Those things have to happen usually at the same time. They overlap each other, the transformation and innovation. But I think that very often people underestimate the work that it takes to do that real transformation, the real work of solving the ugly problems in the organization so that you can do innovative work. And all that to say, like, it was a real pleasure to do that kind of thing with Netflix, because it was fun and interesting. It's movies, you know, that's just a really interesting topic to be working in. But it's a really great example going forward for, you know, for all time now. I still use those examples today because people can so easily relate to them. So it's fun to have that in my background, to be able to tell those stories.
It's a fantastic story, and it shows that I actually interview on this podcast actually the last CEO of Blockbuster. So
Oh yeah.
it shows as well the stories, and as well the story is quite interesting because it says the level of innovation, what happened from DVD to streaming and to take over the entire entertainment. And like you said, the foundations, how we put together the content, and it's still a big problem, and it's one of the questions I'm going to push. How this is influencing everything we do, how we put these foundations in terms of structure of, that is internet in the time, but it was in the foundations to something right now that we still continue doing, but with much more automation with AI. So from this career in some of these big corporations, and as well a couple of startups that you were before, you went and you created as well afterwards Meta Marketeer that we were running for 5 years. Until in 2014 you create Keo Insights. So tell us a bit about that, and as well what is Keo Insights, how it works, and a bit of that transition from the Marketeer, which was more a digital strategy, into Keo Insights.
Yeah, so from Netflix to Meta Marketer, there's a several year gap that, you know, some things are happening. Like I did some other consulting. I worked for HCA, Hospital Corporation of America, which is one of the very biggest enterprises it's the biggest for-profit healthcare company in the world, I believe. I worked for magazines.com, which was, again, a little bit similar to Netflix in the sense that it was structured data about an e-commerce experience. And so that was a really interesting thing to be able to do. I worked also for a company that was a wholly owned subsidiary of BMI, the music publishing clearinghouse, which was doing song sample recognition for radio inventory. So to be able to do inventory of what songs were playing on the radio. All of this was just really interesting sort of sampling, you know, tasting different industries and getting a sense of the different problems that there were to solve in those different industries. And so by the time I started Meta Marketer, which was an analytics and strategy firm that was meant to be helping organizations use better customer experience fundamentals to achieve better results, you know, through data. And what I had seen was that a lot of the companies that I worked with and that I worked adjacent to were struggling with the overwhelming amount of data and analytics and strategic decision making that data, that the numbers really presented to them. There really wasn't a discipline yet. In the early part, in the 2000s, you know, most people who could come up into a marketing manager position or into a strategic advisory type of position in business didn't have a background in statistics or in analytics and couldn't really synthesize the sort of more branded kind of classical marketing understanding of how to make sense of marketing decisions with statistics and analytics, even though there is a very strong discipline within marketing of understanding the numbers. And if you're doing like direct mail or something like that, there had been this kind of this skill, but it was lacking in a lot of the business leadership. So we found an opportunity to create this business as an agency model. And I did that for 5 years, as you mentioned. What I found was that it was the direct consulting piece of working with companies and, you know, being in the company, helping them solve their problem was harder to do as a consulting firm, as a company who was an agency than it was for me as an individual when I would go from company to company and kind of insert myself and solve the problem. So I ended up exiting that company and starting Keo Insights so that it could be more focused on the thought leadership and the changing of the thinking that needs to happen at the leadership level in order to, set the right stage for better decisions to take place, and to create the kind of environment where human experiences are not an afterthought, where they're part of the upfront strategic decision making that goes along with now analytics, which, now we've come a long way. By 2025, and this point, people are a lot better in general inside of organizations at using analytics in strategic ways. But what they're not always very good at is sort of combining all of these different perspectives of what does it mean to have a data-driven perspective? What does it mean to have a human-centric perspective? What does it mean to have a very focused, top-down, leadership-oriented, executive focus on where you're trying to go as an organization? These are all very different ways of thinking about the organization, and they don't always result in good decision-making. They don't always result in making the best decisions that benefit both the company and the people outside the company. So what I wanted to do was bring that together in a more cohesive way, be able to help people navigate the complexity of technology and data and what was happening, the rapid changes that are happening in the technology space, while taking a very executive level view of purpose and direction, and really bringing human centricity into the fold as early in that process as possible. So it's been sort of a mission of mine since I started KO Insights in 2014. And a lot of it is thought leadership. So a lot of it is, writing articles. I'm a professional keynote speaker. That's the big part of what I do, is just going out on stages and hoping to convey some idea through the keynote itself, and then have that message live on in the hundreds and thousands of people who are in those audiences. And that way it reaches far more people than, just by working one-on-one within organizations and trying to affect change in that way. But it's all of those different levels all at the same time that I think make the most change.
Yeah, it's amazing how you take it, and as well the success you did on that, because it's not a simple thing to keep a steady work, especially advising these big corporations, and as well keeping relevance, because one of the things people underestimate is the quantity of work that is behind keeping the live, or I would say the quantity of information that you need to keep updating beyond the top, and then creating engagement with audiences around the world as a speaker myself. And it's quite time consuming as well. And I know that the US market is a fantastic market for that. So before I go to your books, I want to touch as well the Tech Humanist. So it's a fantastic podcast. And you've been working with as well with two other people, and it's amazing what you guys achieved. That's the work you did as well in terms of building that, and as well how you take it forward. So give us a bit of the update, how you work, and some of the things that you are achieving on it.
The Tech Humanist show is a podcast that I started in 2020 during the pandemic, when I think a lot of us who are speakers were finding that we were missing stages, first of all, but also looking for ways to connect and communicate with people. And so, we were doing a lot of virtual keynotes at that time, and it was very natural, I think, to use Zoom and live streaming to connect with people. So I was doing live stream 1 hour discussions with people about technology and its impact on humanity. And that it seemed like the way that people most wanted to consume that after a while was really as a podcast. So it transformed from a multimedia live streaming centric event to being more of a packaged podcast. And I'm happy about that, because it gives us a chance to do different things than we were doing on the live stream. The live stream was very centered on a one-person interview. But the podcast gave us a chance to say, let's take a topic like privacy, and let's sort of discuss the 3 or 4 different angles that we might want to talk about with privacy, and quote different experts throughout, and really get to some of the more salient takeaways that people are going to need to have from this. So it's come a long way. We've gone back and forth with the format. We just won a Web Excellence Award, so we're very pleased and proud about that. But it is still me. I'm the host and executive producer of the show. I have a team of people that, like you, that help to produce it, and that they put together the editing and things like that. But at the end of the day, it really is a passion project of mine that I feel like it's really important. It's a really great way for me to hear from people, just like you're doing, to bring on people that I want to hear, some of the nuances of what they're thinking. And I get to ask the questions and I get to listen and respond. And, as a curious person, just like you, Dinis, I feel like it's such a great opportunity to just be a student in that moment and be someone who's able to hear, but also steer the conversation just as you're doing, and move it toward something that I sort of pick up and go like, you just said a thing that I think is really interesting, and I'd like to explore that a little more. And suddenly the topic we were going to explore for the episode becomes a little different because we have something that we just uncovered that is really important. It's been an opportunity too for I've gotten booked for keynotes that I didn't really know much about the industry, like mining, for example, which is of course a really important topic right now, as rare earth minerals are hotly contested, that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that over the years to come. But I got hired to do a mining association keynote, and I was like, well, I'm interested to know what's the technology discussion about mining. So I brought on the CEO of the association to interview, and she had some incredible insights about that. So it was a great education for me. It was also a great resource for the attendees of my keynote and of that conference to be able to hear why the association brought me to be the keynote speaker of that conference, because it was like the two facets of these two worlds being able to kind of connect and intersect with one another through that podcast discussion. So I think there's incredible ways that these kinds of discussions, these podcasts, can really serve so many different aspects of function and providing so much information in so many rich ways to so many constituents.
And it's a fantastic podcast. Actually, I've been following something and doing research, and it's very special as well, the way you do it and the way you take it forward. So I want to focus on the books because, of course, there's a lot of things I want to ask. So during in this career, just before we go deep dive in some of the things and questions related to the books, you are always writing. So how did you manage both the career as an entrepreneur, or first of all, working for corporations, the other companies, then as an entrepreneur, and then as a writer in parallel? Because I believe that I'm a huge fan of podcasters and thinkers and writers, and of course, being one of them, one of the special things is when you write, you can process a lot of things. And sometimes I fight with my team to make sure that they write things down. And there's even a lot of things how writing, even there was a fantastic interview with Tim Ferriss and Robert Rodriguez that he actually did a diary with his children, and it changed completely the way the children, and it's very beautiful the way he put it. So I want to touch that here because it's one of the things that as a writer, it helped me a lot, although sometimes juggling the writer with the entrepreneur and the thought leader is not easy, especially because writing a book, of course, now with ChatGPT and all the AIs, you can do amazing things, but at the same time you need to put your personality, your different things, and a lot of these books take years to make. So a bit of your background, how you juggle all this.
Yeah, I think, Dinis, you're right on it. There's I think one thing is to understand that writing serves multiple purposes, right? Writing as a form of thinking or pre-thinking is a really important function for anyone really, but especially for people like yourself and myself who are building whole careers around new and original thought and thought synthesis and bringing those ideas to market in some way. So I think it's really important for us to understand writing as a thinking tool. But I also think it's important that we are intellectually honest enough to say that not all writing is that, right? There's plenty of writing that serves a more utilitarian focus, like, replying to your emails. And there's plenty of writing that is more transactional in nature, or sort of more perfunctory. So I think when we break it down, I think it's there's an opportunity for us to be ready for the way that Gen AI is changing how we approach writing. For me, throughout my career, it's been a mix of I think dashing off emails and doing all the fast writing that's necessary. I've been a pretty fast writer when it comes to stuff like that. And then understanding that writing in every form has always been interesting to me. I've written poetry, I've written songs, I've written plays. I've always been fascinated with writing because it is a way to express some new idea, right? Some way of saying something in your own words, like your own particular way of saying a thing that no one else hopefully has said before. And so there's that piece of it. But I think, again, to make us future ready for this generative AI transformation, like we're already in, but we're only going to be even more in that territory as time goes on, where we have to understand how we treat writing, as opposed to using Gen AI to do first drafts for us of things. That's fine if it's more that sort of functional or perfunctory kind of writing. But I think if we're approaching writing as thinking, we have to challenge ourselves to get into our heads and really understand the tangled mess of what's in there and get it out, like on paper, even if on paper is on a screen, because that is such an important part of being human and being a thinking person. So that process is still very dear to me, and still one I will never give up. I can't imagine ever giving up, even though I've been an early adopter of generative AI and AI writing tools, and a heavy user of AI writing tools. But I feel that I know the difference between when I need to write as a form of thinking and when I need to write just because it has to be written, and I'm going to use whatever tools I have to get it done.
Yeah, it's completely, there's a lot of importance on what you said, and as well how this is shifting and shaping everything we're doing right now, because it's the way we integrate all of this process of writing, and as well our writers like us are working as well AI, which in some cases is copy pasting what you do. In other cases right now is a kind of an hybrid between what you do and what AI does. So this takes me, of course, coming back to your books. I'm going to straight away to your new book, and I have a lot of questions here. So in your book, What Matters Next, that it was released in January 2025, almost 1 year ago, a leader's guide to making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving too fast. So since 1 year in AI, it's a big year, and especially this year was probably one of the most disruptive ones. But I want to touch, so the book, for people listening to us, of course, we'll put references. It's a fantastic book. It touches, of course, from the different angles, and there's 3 parts that I'm going to touch. So part 1, a world that's moving too fast. Part 2, making human-friendly tech decisions. And part 3, a leader's guide to the future. So of course, I'm not going to give more away, the ideas for people to read the book, but I want to touch the part 1, okay? And the part 1, and this was in January, so that means probably wrote it for the previous 2 years. So in 2 years, a lot of stuff happening. And as well, 2025 was definitely the most disruptive AI yet. And 2026, I think, is going to be more disruptive and probably more terrifying, although we can be positive. But that's the point of velocity. And the point of velocity is one of the things you touch is the conflicting challenge of living in a too fast world. So I want to touch that, because the challenge, and there's a lot of people say, okay, AI is not bigger than the invention of fire, is not bigger than the invention of printing press, or not bigger than the internet. But of course it is. It's much more. And there's a right, as we know, because there's the language, and there's all the challenge. And as well, there's, of course, I'll make the question a bit more complex, but you're a big brain, so I want to hear your inputs on this. So there's, in one end, I would say that we have 2 schools of thought. One is definitely the school of thought of people that are looking at AI with, I would say, a lot of concern, and we can say fear. You can see a lot of other different things. Some of them are the AI doomers, and there's a lot of that you can put on this. I'm not talking to ones that they don't understand AI. So just the two schools of thought, and then there's a school of thought that are still, which I think is becoming smaller. There are people that look at it in a very optimistic way, but at the same time, very realistic way. So on this perspective of the velocity, how do you see this? Because in the end of the day, it's obvious that AI is taking over the world economy. And there's even, if you look at the 7 biggest companies in the world, most of them are worth 12, well, all of them combined, they're at $12.5 trillion. That's the same size as the world dark economy. And bear in mind that the world economy is $120 trillion. So that's around 10% of the world economy. But the impact they have in the rest of the remaining economy is much bigger. But even these companies are going at a velocity that it's becoming almost at a certain point, okay, where are we going? Are we going just to replace all the humans? And as well, are we going to prepare 9 billion people to deal with something that very few people are doing? So I want to touch that perspective of leadership and conflicting parts of the velocity, and how you see that in the context of your book, but as well in the context of leadership.
Yeah, I think you hit on it, that first of all, when I take apart that subtitle, I usually start with the end as well, the going too fast part, because that is the part that everybody feels, right? And I think it is true that everybody feels it. And most of the reason why I wrote this book the way I wrote it is because I was hearing from audiences at keynotes, mostly executive audiences. So these would be, C-suite leaders in the audience of a keynote who would come up to me personally afterward, not ask questions during the Q&A, but save their question for a private moment one-on-one to say, well, I really appreciate what you shared. These are great vocabularies and frameworks that you're giving us. I will say that I'm really kind of scared right now. Like, it's a very fast pace of technology, and we're beholden by our board to make these decisions very, very quickly. And it doesn't feel like we have the time to sort of sort out what the ramifications are of these decisions. And I was hearing that kind of feedback, and I still hear that kind of feedback consistently, like again and again, to the point where I think it would be scary just to catalog how many times I was hearing that. And so the point I take from this is there needs to be a way, and I tried in What Matters Next to provide this way of making decisions more quickly that also have an ethical bearing to them, that also have some sense of a guidepost that's strategic, that kind of pulls from wisdom. And in order to do that, you have to have that already stored up. You already have to have done the inventory about what it is you know and what it is you don't know but would like to know. And so you're looking for the opportunity, you're asking these questions in order to continue to glean these things about the world. But as you're saying, some of these things are going to keep changing. We're going to see even more disruption. Those are foresights. And the reason you have those foresights is because you were able to synthesize the world around you in a way that sets you up to understand what the future looks like. I think all of this is a disciplined process that clearly you understand how to do. I understand how to do. Not all that many leaders who are in business today have the skill or the education, because we don't teach this, to do what you and I do. And it's a little bit of a futurist mentality. It's definitely a strategic mentality. It is a synthesis mentality. But what it does is allow you to be a quick study in terms of absorbing the information that's coming at you really quick and be able to go like, that looks important, and then leave the rest go by, and then use what you pull from what's happening around you to say, like, with just these little tidbits of the signals, the weak signals that are happening in the world right now, I can see how this, combined with what I insightfully understand about what matters to our organization and what matters to our future direction, shifts what we're going to need to do, how we're going to need to invest in our future. And so I think that's the organizational leadership perspective. I think from an individual leadership or from an individual perspective, it's a little bit different, but it's not that different. It still means that for all of us individually, we need to look at this moment in a through line of thinking. We need to think of it as a continuity and understand where we are on this timeline and what's likely to be coming next, and to be able to prepare ourselves for what it takes to be resilient and adaptable as things are changing in the years to come. And it's a lot of what I think you're already alluding to. It's the disruption of industry. It's the economy shifting in all these different ways toward an enormous amount of centralization into fewer and fewer companies. It's also the disruption of labor. It's all of these different factors. And so what does it mean for individuals to be resilient and nimble and adaptable in those contexts? That's a big discussion, and one I'm happy to go into. But that I think is where you start to set up the parameters of the discussion, is by taking what does acceleration and velocity mean in terms of the questions and the problems it sets up at a governmental regulatory level, at an organizational level, at an individual level, at a sort of societal level. How do we function as a society across all these different dimensions?
So there's a lot to digest there. So yes, first of all, is like you said, we're talking about big corporations, how they're struggling to adapt to AI.
Yeah.
And then you touch the ethics, for instance, on your chapter 4, you talk about ethical impacts and beyond. So let's touch this, and as well, you touch as well ethical acceleration. So I want to touch this because it's something that is not, I think we talk about ethical in very broad, but not in the sense of how this is going to impact both leadership and society. It's already impacting, let's be honest, because I mentioned with you before, so we are at, as we made the interview, December 2025, and we just received recently an MIT report that highlighted that in the US alone, 12.5% of the jobs are being replaced by AI, which is the equivalent to $1.2 trillion. So that's a substantial amount of the world economy, and especially for the US economy. And this is becoming a question of, okay, first of all, the ethics of AI, but as well how this impacts society and the ethics that will come out of this. And I want to touch this, I'll make the question a bit more complex, but it's something that is in my mind. And how you deal with this, because I made a couple of interviews with some of the top AI philosophers in the world, like Nick Bostrom and a couple of others. And one of the things is, for instance, in the case of Nick Bostrom, he's already 10 years ahead.
Right.
He doesn't even think about humans he already thinks about digital sentience, which is amazing. But of course, we still have a lot of 9 billion people that are still not prepared.
Right. I'm not ready to give up on humanity yet.
Yes, exactly the point. And even not about whatever you like or not, that they're creating like billions of digital sentience that will be as well. That is another question. But my question, coming back to the ethics, is about the humans. So the point to the humans is, okay, how are we going to deal with this? Because for instance, most of the world's society as we speak, and without going to geopolitics, but the main concern of people is immigration and the problems about the economy and so forth. But you are creating something that will disrupt everything we know about it. So I want to touch this not just from a corporation perspective, but from an ethical human perspective, because these questions, even me, I have to think about that as a builder of technology and as an AI, because one thing is me as a thought leader, the other me is me building technology AI, is the risks that are opening, is like opening a Pandora box that we don't know. And at the same time, you and me are in the Western world, although both the Europe and US are going for a lot of challenges at the moment, is how these challenges are going. Because if I tell the truth, my AI partly will kind of learn and do a bit of the truth. But if I'm telling lies and if I'm telling a lot of unethical concerns, and for instance, at the moment, we are already at the stage that, for instance, Anthropic was recently having an hacking attack into the code of AI by AI code. And as well, we have a lot of episodes of LLMs that sometimes start going rogue. Even on my own production, I have a couple of LLMs that went rogue. And I'm not talking about the size of course, the major AI players. So I want to touch on this, and this is you have 2 chapters about this, is the thought line thinking, ethics, impact, and beyond. And then chapter 5 of the part 2, ethical acceleration, making human-friendly tech decisions. So I'm asking a bigger question, but it touches your question. They're quite big. Your chapters are massive as well.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think is a really important facet here is that you mentioned these jobs going away and being replaced by AI. And I think it's a really important reframe to acknowledge that the jobs aren't going away because of AI. The jobs are going away because of leadership decisions that are prioritizing AI and prioritizing profit and cost savings over human jobs and over the preservation of human labor. And I think it's just an important thing to spell out, that's the shorthand we're using to talk about that. Because I think those are the decisions that we're actually talking about in What Matters Next. And in thinking about these ethical decisions, they need to be the ones that the boardrooms are making, that the executive leadership is making. When we think about what it means to replace, 15,000 humans in call center roles who are outsourced to all over the world with AI, that's going to have obviously some trickle down impacts that are going to be systemic, that are going to be global, that are going to be measured in different ways than just what that individual corporation's profit margin is. That's the thing that I think it requires of us, this moment requires of us, that we think holistically and think strategically and think at a global macro level. Even if we operate in a way that is mostly constrained to our organizations, that the decisions we're making within those organizations have to be conscious of, the sort of the larger scheme and the larger strata of how these things play out. So many of those things I think are interconnected, and we're going to see just how interconnected they are by creating huge swaths of people who are laid off from outsourced work and reshaping the global South, reshaping economies, not necessarily for the better. And at the moment that we're also having huge immigration disagreements and struggles, it's a very, very understatement to call it a disagreement in the US. But I think all of this to say, these are greatly interconnected concepts, and we don't want to talk about the political side of those discussions inside the corporate walls or at a corporate centric conference, because we all sort of agree to this quasi-professional principle of we're not political here, we're just talking about profit, we're just talking about corporate direction. But there are human impacts, and those human impacts go beyond politics. They go beyond, the decisions that are being made here. So I just think that that's a really important part of the discussion, is to talk about what we're talking about in order to be ethically honest, intellectually honest, and make these decisions without sort of putting a blindfold over our eyes so that we don't have to see the downstream implications of the harms we may be doing. That said, I don't think that all of the numbers that we see about jobs being lost as a result of AI are necessarily because of AI. I think that many of the times that we see those numbers, we assume that they are bundled with AI decisions, and they aren't necessarily. They are the cutbacks that companies are doing because they think they can sort of batch these cutbacks into a busy news day and get the grace of being bundled alongside other company names, like 10,000 layoffs from company X, 15,000 layoffs from company Y. And it just looks like, okay, well, that's a forgettable news day because everybody made all these cuts. So it must just be what's happening right now. I don't think that they're all explicitly AI innovation that's creating a lack of need for those human contributor roles. So I think there's a lot going on in the mix there. And the other piece of it is you see oftentimes overly aggressive moves by leadership where they'll cut 15,000 jobs and then realize that they overcut and need to bring 5,000 of those people back in order to backfill what the AI can't actually do once they've made those decisions. So again, that is, you're saying I'm asking these very complex questions. I'm giving you very complex answers, but that's just the nature of this right now. I think we're in a time where all of these discussions have, if we're honest about them, they have a lot of intersecting pieces and parts that really need to be acknowledged in order to have any sort of truthful discussion about what's really happening.
I subscribe, and it's not an easy. I like what you said. The devil is on details, like they say, and it's more about as well how we actually prepare leaders and as well ourselves for this. Because the challenge, and for me, the biggest risk is if we let these AIs lack control, and especially because, of course, the cost of doing artificial intelligence is becoming smaller. Of course, in big scale, it's difficult, but you can still do a lot of things that create a lot of damage. So, for instance, what we had with social media and all the disruption in AI is going to be much bigger, especially when deepfakes come to bigger scale, and as well all the manipulation that you can do out of AI. But coming back to your book, and this is particularly very personal for me, is okay. So one of the challenges, and of course you are one of the Tech Humanist personalities as well. So how we keep our humanity, because there was even a very public case of a fight between two of the biggest titans in industry. There was the founder of Google and Elon Musk, where Elon Musk was saying, and this was public, that we were actually, the founder of Google thought we were already above humans, and Elon Musk was still fighting, and Elon Musk has as well his own things. But coming back to this part of, okay, how we keep this part of making a future, and they work with a lot of organizations. I just mentioned the founder of Google, but how can we keep this humanity and at the same time keep a competitive level? Because the first thing, for instance, I have young people in the team, and some of them brought me some things that I didn't thought about it, because I think people like you and me are so inside of this that this is normal for us. But I remember, for instance, the first time I presented an AI agent that we built with a friend of mine, and she started crying because it was very disruptive for her. And then the young people in the team that told me, well, most of the young people are becoming completely against AI and becoming skeptical or cynical. And this, for me, it's probably the biggest challenge, because if you become cynical, you don't believe in anything. So that means you become out of the scope of a narrative. And that's why we have so much theories of conspiration and so forth. So coming back to your work as a humanist and tech humanist, you highlight in your book some things like an entire chapter about the future-ready evolution. And as well, one of the things in your conclusion is a more human-friendly world. So I want to touch these two things, because is how we bring this. And for instance, if you're a CEO, you have to make a decision. Am I going to automate, or am I going to keep these people, especially when we have so much companies disrupting everything? So this is a level that I would like to hear, especially because you deal with the biggest corporations in the world, and you have to coach them to be too ethical, find a better balance.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of leaders right now that I appreciate as a leader of my own company at obviously a much smaller scale than what many of these companies I'm advising operate, is a continuity or consistent theme that many leaders have chosen to say, to the greatest extent possible, what we want to do is grow and scale and keep up with acceleration with AI, while not losing the human contribution that we have. So we want to preserve the human roles. We want to understand how to keep, this sense of a human workplace. So you have the ability to build rapport, institutional knowledge, culture, many of the things that are really important to have in an organization, especially if you're building an organization that's supposed to provide services or products to people outside of the organization. If you lose that human-to-human connection as time goes on, that feels like a very weird reality that we could be faced with. So I think we all intrinsically understand that that's a better a better version of that is to keep a sense of humanity in business that works with humanity, and to use AI and technology to scale the operations, to scale the outreach, to scale the capabilities. And so that's the promising way to go about this. Now, obviously, not everybody is subscribing to that, and there are a lot of different variations on that. But personally, I think what is the most instructive thing to take away from this, or the wisest reflection in this moment, it's kind of ironic, Dinis, that you have as your background this very green, forested, naturey sort of background, because I think that's what really we stand to benefit from taking a step back and thinking we are living on a planet, and whether, to Elon Musk's dismay, we have not yet gotten to Mars, right? So we have to do what we can to make the most of this planet. And making the most of this planet, I think, is respecting the fact that it is limited. It is a finite resource. The resources that exist on this planet are finite. And so we have to think of ways to balance this world that we live in that is physical. It's funny, I'm coming back around to this pixels and place mentality, right? Like my earlier book you mentioned. But the place-centric, the human world, the physical world, the environmental world we live in, we inhabit, is one dimension of reality in our thinking. And at the same time, we all spend an awful lot of time in the pixel space, in that interconnected, the metaverse turned out to be something that isn't really something people are spending a lot of time thinking about right now, although spatial computing is still very much a going concern. But I think the reality is all of us are spending an awful lot of time in this unbounded, limitless, sort of pixelated and virtual space, in the sense that we assign a lot of capacity to that space, yet we live in this finite, bounded physical space. And I think that's the tension we're going to need to resolve in order to live well and harmoniously in this next era, is to understand how do we use the capabilities of the technologies that are limitless in order to bring back some capabilities to this grounded physical earth and the humanity that exists within it, in our animal realm, in our human realm, right? And also allow our intellectual realm that exists in this pixelated virtual space to do this incredible, boundless, infinite work that takes us into unknown spaces, that allows us to make discoveries that we didn't know were possible to make, that allows us to create wealth no one thought possible, that allows us, but then what do we do with that? So it's this constant reckoning, this back and forth tension between finite and infinite, between physical and virtual. And I think that tension is going to exist with us for quite a long time. And it's going to be the one that the wiser and more centered among us will do a better job of navigating that tension. And I think leaders for the next generation have to be good, have to learn how to be good at navigating that tension and making wise, regenerative decisions here on this physical plane, while also making infinitely unbounded decisions in that virtual plane.
It's completely, of course, I subscribe, but it's a very difficult task, and I think increasingly, difficult. So I have two questions. I know that I'm close to the time. So one question that I have is a more personal one. Is so, as a technologist and as a person that is dealing with all of these corporations, so we're dealing with a lot of part of decision. And coming back to artificial intelligence in particular, these decisions are creating an element of, whatever we like it or not, definitely there's a new species. And like Noah Harari said recently, we build a new species and we are the Homo sapiens, but there's a new species that will take over. It's just a question of, might be 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years probably. But effectively, we're going to have an hybrid of human coming. And this takes us into science fiction territory. But as someone that has been working. I interview actual robots in this series, so I've been very involved on this in a lot of layers. And for instance, I remember the first time I interviewed a robot was like before the AI waves. It was like 5-6 years ago, and I remember that I was mind blown because the questions that were answered. I actually on purpose I changed all my questions in order to understand how would react to me, and I was shocked completely that I ended up actually speaking for 1 hour with a robot, and this was much before everything we're talking right now in AI, and much before OpenAI and so forth. So this brings to a point that okay, what kind of narrative we're going to build for society, and as well, what role as thought leaders and leaders we can actually bring to this. But as well, I believe that we have very small time, bearing in mind all the velocity, and there's this probably a sense of urgency, but a sense of, okay, how you deal with this, not just for people listening to us. I'm sure, of course, not everyone is leading and is understanding AI as you do, and as the people that you and me deal with. But even in my case, probably from all the people I speak, of course, people exceptions like you, I think 90% have no clue. And I'm talking, I always remember one case of one person I spoke in a small panel. And after that panel, he came to me, that person, and asked me, you spoke very well, but I didn't understand anything you were talking about. And I was not too technical. And this was just a couple of months ago. And that person was behind a very big financial organization. So, and that scared me, because if a person like that is managing hundreds of millions of dollars, so billions of dollars of decisions, said something like that, we still have a big elephant in the room. So I want to touch this elephant, because of course, if you talk about all the Googles and all these guys, of course they know, or at least they're more prepared, but we have the rest of the world. So that part is from your experience talking in places around the world and understanding these leaders. And let's go a bit from these top tech leaders to the second layer that are not the tech leaders, that is the ones I'm talking. How can we create first of all, a more utopian narrative and not dystopian? Because very easily you go dystopian, and if you go dystopian, then you create a very big negative, because trust is what binds society, what keeps us moving forward.
Yeah, it's funny that you use that utopian and dystopian terminology, because that's actually something that I often use in my keynotes, just to illustrate that those are the only two ways that we've ever been taught culturally to talk about the future. And that's a real shortcoming, because we don't really have good vocabulary for understanding the nuanced way that the future is likely to play out. The future is really just the present that hasn't gotten here yet. So the present is multifaceted. We know how to talk about the present in nuanced ways, but we don't have that vocabulary for the future. And what I find is that if we throw away dystopia versus utopia, and if we say that the future is simply the time ahead of us that is at least partly knowable and predictable, because it is at least partly shaped or determined by the actions and decisions we have already made, as well as those we make today, that is a much more high agency way of thinking about the future. And what it says to us is that dystopia and utopia are actually still kind of useful, in the sense that they are, in terms of literature and culture, like science fiction gives us these terms, because what they're trying to do is show us dystopia is about what we fear, and utopia is about what we hope for. And we have tools within business and within organizational development that we can use to employ those same mechanics. So we can use strategy and we can use planning for dealing with what we think are the risks of something, the risks and harms that we think could happen. And the ways we hope to succeed are what we try to capture within our planning and our strategy. So I advocate for what I call strategic optimism, which is a blend of sort of both of those things, right? It's to say, look, if the future is just the time in front of us and is at least partly knowable or predictable, because it's at least partly shaped or determined by the actions and decisions we've already made, as well as those we'll make today, then what we need to be able to do is understand, what are we afraid of? What do we want to control for, and create boundary management around the risks that we think exist? And what do we hope for? That's the piece I think we miss so much of the time, is what would we love to have happen? What would we really ideally like to be striving toward? And let's create some conditions that will actually lean us into that while we manage the risks and harms that we've identified over here. So it's like, it's treating utopia and dystopia as both and saying, look, let's articulate in really clear ways what it is we fear, what it is we hope for, and create a plan that actually helps us get toward those better outcomes while managing the risks that we think exist around the harms that could happen and the biases that could creep in and things like that. So I think there are ways for us to still go forward. And you're right, I think the window is closing. We're definitely, the scale is getting so vast. But I think that the conversation is still relevant to be able to connect with one another about opportunities to use AI in meaningful ways, opportunities to grow relevant educational programs, to harness the capabilities of AI in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals for the UN, to be able to think about optimizing wind power, solar power, to be able to think about removing plastic from the ocean, to be able to think about all of the many, many challenges that we face at that humanity scale in alignment with what individuals are trying to achieve, in alignment with what organizations are trying to achieve. And I really think it comes down to just every time you're thinking about the future, every time you start to worry about the future, that you bring it back to this question of what are the decisions that I've already made? What are the actions I've already taken? So what's the direction I can already see playing out? And what would I like it to be? Like, how could I shape it? How could I actually change the trajectory of the future in one little way, in some way that I can achieve today? And that's the What Matters Next title. That's what that refers to, is, what's that incremental, iterative step that we could take as an organization or as a society, as a culture, individually, whatever it is, that actually sets us up for a better future, because it aligns what we're trying to manage as risks and what we hope for.
Very inspiring. And I believe that is the biggest, more difficult and more important thing that we need all to work. And I put a sense of urgency on this because I know that the people listen to your keynotes and mine as well. They understand this, but at the same time, there's a lot of panic. But at the same time, there's a lot of how can I do it? Between the panic, there's as well a lot of component of people paralyzing, and I think the paralyzing part is the key thing, and as well a lot of lack of knowledge. I think people are not understanding how impactful this is. They still think, okay, AI is like, okay, I just like using the internet or using Netflix or stuff like that. Is a bit more more consistent and more dangerous than that. Let's put it that way. So I want to finish on a more positive, and you being the tech humanist, I want to touch on that direction as well. So for last question is about, you have your books, and of course I recommend people to listen to your podcasts and to your books that are amazing, and all the wealth of content that you produce and actually that you share. So what would be the message? And of course your book finishes, coming back to your book, is a very beautiful part that is about a leader's guide to the future, and as well creating what matters next. And like you said, we don't need to be absolutists in terms of the utopian and dystopian. There's a middle ground that we can actually build that is a more realistic ground. That I think that's what you mentioned, because utopian in the end of the day was something that doesn't exist, but it's something that we work for the hope, and as well as a metaphor for what you can do. But how can we make that reality? Because in the end of the day, it's about making, and it's even in a relationship, in life, is all about making concessions. You cannot always get what you want, and although you have the song, you always can get what you want. But I believe you cannot always get what you want. That's probably another song to be written, but you understand where I'm coming. So I want to test that from the perspective of your writing, from your books, and as well what matters next and what matters now.
Well, the underlying message of Tech Humanist and Pixels in Place and A Future So Bright and What Matters Next, so much of my work comes down to understanding that the core human experience is one of meaning. We are meaning makers and meaning seekers. And so I think it really comes back to understanding at a fundamental human level, meaning is what matters. And it's the lens that we can intuitively use to understand the decisions we should be making, how we should be moving through this world, how we should be navigating toward our future. If we understand that we should be always creating meaningful experiences for each other and at scale and for ourselves, really seeking out that meaning. And so I think in terms of what leaders can do to build toward that and how it comes together, like in this final message, is I think the biggest opportunity leaders have is to lead with questions and not assumptions. That we need to be a learning culture. You know, Dinis, you're so much a learner, and I am too. I think this is something that we can definitely feel proud to model for the people we work with, that to really surround yourself with knowledge that you have yet to acquire and ask meaningful, profound, probing questions about it is the only way forward. And I think we also need to be curious enough to bring diverse voices into the conversation early, like make sure we're talking to a well-rounded set of stakeholders. And inside of a lot of organizations, especially in the US right now, there's a lot of kickback to this concept of diversity, but I think diversity has become a term that should not be a dirty word. It's absolutely just about making sure you're getting a well-rounded education, making sure you're bringing different stakeholders to the table, because you can't possibly understand all of the ways that the world is seen by all of the different people in the world. You need there to be many, many people who sort of represent the different views that people have and the different experiences that people have. And then I think the other thing to take away here is, you know, this isn't about technology. It's not just about whether technology is possible. It's not just about, you know, can we do this thing with technology? It's very much about if something is wise, should we be doing this? If we think we can do this and we think we should, then how should we do this? And that's where we really do need to involve philosophers and ethicists and community advocates and people who really represent that people side, the human side of this discussion, equally with the people who represent the tech side of the discussion. So that's a bit idealistic. I don't know very many leaders who are really taking all of that to heart, but I don't think that it's unrealistic to say that those would be the best decisions in this moment. If we really were taking that guidance to heart, we would be making the most future ready, the most human friendly, and the most tech aligned decisions that we could with the most powerful technology this world has known and will know for the time being. So I really hope that that there are some leaders who hear this and think, you know what, I'm that kind of leader. I'm going to make those kinds of decisions.
Amen. I couldn't agree more. And it's yeah, we need that. We need that for the sake of all of us, because if we don't do that, we're going to have a very dystopian, and that I believe the dystopian can be. So I believe that humanity will come first, and that's why your books and your writing and your optimism, beautiful smile highlights
Thank
that.
you.
So well, it's been an honor and pleasure. I think we passed 1 hour and a half. So
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
So of course I have much more questions. We might do a take two in the near future. But I want my audience to know about you, and as well we'll push a lot of your publications, books, and things like that. You are from LinkedIn to a lot of different things. There's your websites that we will highlight. So it's been a truly honor and pleasure, and I just wish you that fantastic inspiration that we need for the world. Sometimes I have my doom days. I think you brought a bit of sunshine, and we need that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dinis. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching this episode. Please share your thoughts, questions, or a topic you want next in the comments section. My team and I read them all and will tailor our future videos around your feedback. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next drop. Until next time, stay healthy and informed.